and welcome to Unreligiously. My name is Lauren, and today we are going to be talking about something that has really hit home for a lot of people who have left the evangelical community. The whole situation with Michael Tate, the lead singer of the Newsboys, is the focus of today's video, and honestly, it wasn't an easy one to make. It's like watching a familiar story unfold. It's I've seen this movie before type of thing, and it shows us how certain evangelical systems can just hide and then reveal and then super quickly switch things up and forgive really serious and even abusive stuff, often without even dealing with the pain that is caused to victims. This isn't just about one person's actions or one person's accusations. This is about a stark and painful example of the deep-seated patterns that we see in the evangelical church when it comes to concealment, control, and manufactured forgiveness. We see this time and time again, and even if you're not famous and you're not part of the evangelical megachurches out there, you've probably seen this in some version in your own life, in your own religious settings. That's how common this is.
I mean, he stepped down from the Newsboys, and he didn't have to say nothing. You know, he could have hit his knees and repented, and that'd been fine between him and God. He could have took it to his grave. But no, the man had enough decency to stand up and tell people that he had, some issues there, and us as Christians need to forgive that man, and love that man and show him love and kindness, But no, they want to beat him down, buddy.
When you start to see the pattern, it forces you to ask tough questions about true accountability and what that even means, what genuine healing looks like, and where the focus really lies when Christian leaders are exposed. So, as many of you probably already know, the Roy's Report, which is this awesome independent journalism group, recently put out a pretty intense investigation. This wasn't just some rumor floating around. It was a really detailed report with multiple allegations of sexual assault and serious drug abuse against Michael Tate.
That I was in Nashville in 2022 covering the Dove Awards, the basically annual Christian Music Awards, and I caught up with some friends while I was in town, and they said to me, we keep hearing stories about this person and no one's doing anything about it. Can you do anything about it as a journalist? And so I said, what evidence do you have? What sources? Who is willing to talk? I trusted this person, and so they referred me onto a few people, and I started digging in and found that there was a lot to uncover, sadly, about Michael Tate, and that's when the story came across my table. So it's been 2.5 years now.
Get this. It spanned years, maybe even decades. This kind of reporting is so vital because for those of us who've been around the evangelical culture, it's pretty clear that these types of stories usually only come out from someone outside the system digs it up. Internal mechanisms oftentimes will fail you and won't get people the help that they so desperately need when they're the victims of abuse. It really says a lot about how closed off and self-protective some parts of the Christian music world can be. Reputations are fiercely guarded, and often it's done so at the expense of truth and justice. Then, just a few days only after this big bombshell dropped, Michael Tate himself put out a statement. He actually admitted that the reports were, in quotes, largely true. He said he'd touched men in an unwanted and sensual way, and that he'd been leading a double life for 20 years. He called it sin and mentioned that he was getting help. And seriously, this is where the evangelical alarm bells start to ring. They're blaring in my ears because what we are seeing here is the classic evangelical playbook on how to manage a public crisis and public perceptions and crucially to really reframe a deeply harmful situation into a narrative of spiritual warfare and spiritual struggle and subsequent redemption. Of course, Michael Tate, the lead singer of a Christian worship band, is going to be struggling with things. Of course, Satan would want him to struggle. Those are the types of things that people will say when abuse comes to light. The immediate confession, although it seems honorable, it often functions as a preemptive strike, and it tries to just control the narrative so that whatever else comes out after this, we can say, well, yeah, that's not news. He admitted himself that he'd been doing it.
The former lead singer of the Newsboys is responding to allegations of sexual and drug abuse. Michael Tate released a confession online. He admitted in it to abusing both cocaine and alcohol while also confessing to touching other men in unwanted ways. He says he's ashamed of his life's choices and that he can't make any excuses for those. Tate says he left the band back in January to get help.
I don't know if you guys know this, but I actually do have a background in public relations. I worked in PR in LA for a few years, and although that certainly doesn't make me an expert, I do have a little bit of an eye into the behind the scenes of how this works and what they might be doing. It is really clear that he is only coming out now after abuse has been told to us because he's trying to get ahead of it. This isn't honorable, and even though it seems obvious when you're watching this video, if you look at the comment sections on videos or articles, people are defending him in this way. Let's break down the first big piece of this. The decades of silence and a culture of concealment.
I would be doing a disservice to not share with you the actual verbiage from the Roy's report. Let me go ahead and read you the article, or portions from the article. Former Newsboys frontman Michael Tate accused of sexual assault, grooming, and substance abuse, dating back to 2004. The report says, it's been called Nashville's worst kept secret. For decades, allegations have circled that the Newsboys frontman, Michael Tate, formerly of DC Talk, had groomed and sexually assaulted numerous victims. After a 2.5-year investigation by the Roy's report, which included interviewing more than 50 sources, TRR has documented Tate's alleged predatory pattern with stories dating back more than 2 decades. TRR has also corroborated allegations of Tate's alcohol and substance abuse with multiple sources. 3 men spoke to TRR, alleging that Tate befriended them individually on Christian music tours in 2004, 2010, and 2014. They were all 22 years old at the time. 2 men stated that they were drinking alcohol with Tate and later woke to him fondling their genitals. One alleged Tate also offered him cocaine while on the Newsboy tour bus. The third told TRR that Tate gave him a back massage while skinny dipping and later invited him to share his king-size bed. There, Tate allegedly non-consensually massaged his anal region. TRR reached out repeatedly to Tate for comment with no response. It's not an exaggeration to say that for many evangelical teens who came of age in the 90s, the Newsboys were a core part of their evangelical Christian experience, said Leah Payne, professor of American Religious History at Portland Seminary. They're reformed in some ways as an ongoing supergroup, most notably recruiting Michael Tate, who is 1/3 of DC Talk. They've really had a second life that sort of gives voice to American conservatism. Although there have been rumors of misconduct, Tate and his network's influence and ability to blackball people from the industry have squelched them, sources say. The tide shifted January 15th when TikTok influencer Azariah Southworth, who famously outed journalist Jonathan Merritt in July 2012, said in a video reel that Tate is gay. Southworth did not provide evidence and went against journalistic ethics by publicly outing Tate's alleged sexuality without consent. But it was enough to disrupt the status quo in Nashville, where the heart of Christian music's power and money reside. The following day, Tate announced he was stepping down. In a statement posted on Newsboys' social media, Tate stated that stepping down from Newsboys was, in quote, a shock to even myself, but amidst prayer and fasting, I have clarity that this is the right decision. The announcement came after the release of the Tate Helms' new single, How Many Times, and 2 days before their first show of the year at Poplar Bluff, Missouri. Band member Adam McGee told Fox 58 the band was scrambling to re-record the single, and a new version of the song, led by McGee, was soon released after. The chaos left Newsboy fans asking for ticket refunds on social media or expressing confusion at the quick turnaround of lead singers. In September 2010, 22-year-old Steven, who asked to remain anonymous, was living the dream. As a touring musician for the Chris Sly Band, he walked onto a festival stage every night and played guitar to crowds of screaming teenagers. Growing up in a conservative Christian family with missionary parents, this was surreal. I was a huge DC Talk fan, and Tate was just like a weird idol, Steven told TRR. As a kid, Steven had played DC Talk's Jesus Freak on repeat, even though it was outlawed by his parents. So when the Chris Sly Band was offered a slot opening for the Newsboys with Tate as lead singer, Steven was in awe. But things took a turn when Tate seemed to take a special interest in him. Lead singer Chris Sly recounted to TRR the moment Tate first saw Steven, saying he was intensely focused on the 22-year-old while their band played on stage before a Newsboys set. Most of the time, big stars do not hang around and watch the opener shows, Sly said. I remember sort of being peeved that Tate cared more about my bandmate than he cared about me, and it slowly evolved into something that I felt was weird. Initially, Steven and Tate met briefly backstage during a pre-concert prayer led by Tate. After the tour ended, Steven worked as a clerk at a store in Brentwood, a suburb 10 miles south of Nashville. It was here he encountered his childhood idol, again 2 months later, and this time Tate gave him his phone number. It started out we were friends, Steven recalled. We went to a movie, he picked me up, and then we would usually just play darts at this bar in Nipper's Corner. Steven wasn't fazed by the 21-year age gap between them, but Sly, who was both his bandmate and housemate, was acutely aware of it. It felt like a weird, attraction sort of thing, Sly told TRR. They were texting all the time, and they got really close really fast. It was just love bombing. Tate was pouring it on to Steven in really interesting and kind of gross ways looking back. He would call Steven last minute. He would take him to steakhouses and pay for the meal and get him very expensive shots of alcohol. I have this vague memory that there was a back room at a restaurant that he took Steven to. That kind of stuff is really impressive to someone who grew up as a poor missionary kid, especially with someone like Tate who you think you're safe with. Steven said Tate poured him highball glasses of Maker's Mark bourbon. He drank 3 with Tate egging him on, Steven said. Tate also reportedly drank alcohol heavily. Then, feeling sick from alcohol consumption, Steven vomited over the second-story balcony. Feeling dizzy, he went downstairs and lay in the backyard. Tate followed him. Everything was spinning, he told TRR. After a short time, Steven and Tate went back to the second floor and Tate led him to the living area. I was super embarrassed because this dude's my idol at the time and I'm super out of it, Steven said. I'm super sleepy, so he has me get on the couch and he was like, I'll give you a foot massage. Telling TRR this seemed, in quotes, kind of weird, Steven said he then passed out. Steven said he then woke up around 4 a.m. with Tate fondling my genitals, and then he was also kissing my mouth, saying he went into a freeze response and he didn't know what to do. Steven tried to pull away multiple times to stop Tate's behavior, but it didn't work. I started stirring, and he kept kissing me while touching my penis, Steven said. Eventually, I just moved my head, and he stopped, and then he just kind of froze too. 15 years later, Steven still remembers what time he left Tate's house because it was done in secrecy. I left before 6 a.m. This is when I figured out that he had a family living with him, Steven said. He needed me to get out before the kids started waking up for school. When Steven arrived at home that morning, he told Sly that he had slept over and that Tate had given him a foot massage. He only told his girlfriend about what followed. I very much did not want to be excommunicated from Christian music, Steven told TRR. That's just one example of a story shared in this article.
Michael Tate straight up said that he was living a double life for 20 years. So let that just sink in for a minute. This wasn't a mistake. This wasn't something that was just a momentary lapse in reasoning or one night of substance abuse. This was 20 years. This isn't about one guy messing up. though obviously he did. This points to a larger problem, a much bigger problem in a deeply ingrained system that lets this kind of harmful behavior not only just exist, but actually thrive without being dealt with for a incredibly long time.
I want to hold space for them and their story and hear the facts that they're sharing with me, and recognize any pain that they're feeling, but also celebrating their recovery, because lots of these people have gone through a lot of trauma recovery. The second part is then holding space for the fact that Michael Tate is such, it feels like an understatement to say he's such an influential name in Christian music. He is so loved, both by people, but there are people in Christian music in the industry who adore him, as well as fans and people across the world. He has played a pivotal role in people's faith and making music with both DC Talk and Newsboys. So I knew that holding these two things together, if I had enough truth and evidence to make me and believe that these stories about Tate were true, these alleged stories were true, holding those two things together was really difficult because it meant I had to meet them in the middle. And yeah, so it was about going, how do I take that journey, recognizing what is true while also holding a space that this man has a lot of sway in Christian music for multiple reasons. So I have over 50 sources, and I know that without stating names, that feels like she chose a number out of thin air. The reason there are so many sources is because I've been doing this for so long, and so I think I started with about six potential stories. Not all of them have been published. Not all of them. Some of them ended up being dead leads. I started with 6, and people would then refer me on to their friends, saying they can fill you in on a background story. There is more here. And so the process in that is basically going to each source and asking them not only what your story is, but who can corroborate it. So who did you tell immediately after the event or as close to the event as possible? Did you file a police report? Are there medical reports? Are there text messages? Are there photos? And you have to pull as much of that as possible to then go, is this credible? And ultimately it came down to the fact that the 3 reports that alleged reports that we shared of this alleged behaviour with Tate, they all match the same pattern of behaviour over and over. All of these men were 22 at the time, which was bizarre, but was just a fact that came across the table. And they all happen in similar instances. And I was hearing enough corroborating reports off record from sources to tell me that people weren't surprised by this. So that is why basically we went there. And then in addition to my fact checking, this was fact checked by the Roy's report, because they knew that legally they had to make sure this was backed.
Think about the implications of this. A person that is highly visible, highly influential in their positioning, and they're located within a moralistic community. He was still able to hide a secret life involving serious allegations of harm for 20 years, 2 decades. That didn't happen in a vacuum. And I'm sure that as I'm saying this, you're going, yeah, the story isn't unfamiliar to me. I've heard it before, because we have heard it time and time again. I just did a video about Chi Alpha and how abuses by Savala, a predator, were committed over many years, again and again and again, despite reports, despite the fact that we should have known better. Consider the context for a second here. Michael Tate is a huge name in Christian music. He's been on countless tours, played for tons of people, and was a beloved figure, basically an icon in the evangelical community. And he had a hugely influential role. I can say proudly that I've always disliked Michael Tate and the Newsboys, but that is less to do with any sort of insight that I had and a lot more to do with the fact that they would headline the Christian music festival that I would go to every summer, and I wanted Skillet to headline the main night because the Newsboys just did not bring the same vibe to the function, trust me. If I remember correctly, they actually would play the God's Not Dead movie afterwards too. But really think about it. Michael Tate has been on countless tours. He's played for tons of people and is a beloved figure. He had so many people around him. He had bandmates, he had managers, church leaders, tour organizers, fellow artists. How many of them do you think knew about what was going on, or even just had a hunch or thought to say something to someone else, or heard whispers, or even personally experienced or witnessed something that was concerning or wrong or abusive, and yet nothing happened. Nothing substantial happened. No one said anything. He didn't seek help before this, and he was allowed to continue. The sad truth is that there probably was a lot. This probably is not a huge secret to those that are close to the Newsboys sphere.
So you want to know why I outed Michael Tate? I'll tell you why. Because I grew up in a Christian Zionist nationalist home that told me who I am as a gay man is a sin. And then I watched people like Michael Tate reinforce that message and endorse that message and preach that message as if it was the truth. And I believed it like it was the truth. So when I found out that was not the truth, I was filled with rage and grief. And then when I saw Michael Tate advocating for Donald Trump, who is actively doing my community and my trans siblings measurable harm, he lost every bit of privacy. He lost his right to privacy. So that's why I outed him. Little did I know that Michael Tate is not just gay. He's a motherfucking monster. Multiple people have come forward with sexual assault allegations. Investigative journalists have been working on this for years. I was the only one willing enough to go public with it. So, you want to know why I outed Michael Tate? That's why. It was also the worst kept secret in all of Christian music. Any insider could tell you, oh yeah, Michael's gay. He's a deceiver, he's a fraud, and he's a predator. So that's why I outed Michael Tate. This is a developing story. This is probably the last video I'm going to make about it for a while. But just know that the truth is coming out, and the truth will stand.
This points to a silent pact, an unspoken agreement within the certain evangelical circles that prioritize collective image over individual well-being. In these situations, they'll convince you that these figureheads almost take the place of God, that if you make them look bad, if you make Michael Tate look bad, if you put Michael Tate on trial, then you're also putting the Christian church and Jesus on trial. The whole evangelical entertainment industry, with its immense focus on keeping up a perfect, untarnished public image, protecting its marketable stars, and guarding the huge financial empires built on family-friendly content, often it becomes a perfect hiding spot for abuse and for cover-ups. There's often this unspoken rule, this intense pressure to protect the ministry or the brand above all else. This culture, whether it means to or not, it inadvertently and sometimes deliberately puts the institution's reputation and financial stability over actual safety, the actual healing, and the actual well-being of the participants, of the people that they're supposed to be serving. Victims often feel explicitly pressured into silence, or maybe implicitly, and their stories are minimized, dismissed, or even actively suppressed. Accountability gets pushed off forever until an external force makes them do something and makes it impossible to ignore. The entire system ends up being like a fortress, designed to keep uncomfortable truths locked away lest they tarnish the gleaming reputation of the church. Then comes the inevitable moment of forced reckoning, when the truth unearthed by external forces, like we said, like these brave journalists, can no longer be contained. What's the immediate, almost unbelievable, predictable response? A swift, often highly publicized confession. This confession, while seemingly acknowledging the wrongdoing, is almost always wrapped up in highly spiritualized language that's going to encourage you to forgive them as quickly as possible, not throw stones, and to, just forgive them and simply move on. It's a strategic move, and they're not really taking accountability. They're only saying, yes, this is true, because if they don't do that, that will be even more damning for their career in the long run. Now, let me be clear. Owning up to your actions as sin is a component of personal spiritual reflection and a necessary step in any genuine repentance process if you're a believer. However, in these public high-stakes situations involving public figures and widespread harm, this framing serves a really specific purpose, and it's honestly disgusting. They just want you to call it sin and compare it to sin, but the reality is they didn't commit a sin. This is a pattern of abuse. It's criminal behavior that deserves to be rectified. They deserve to be brought to justice. It's problematic because it completely shifts the narrative away from serious allegations of criminal or really harmful, emotionally abusive actions against other people to reframing it as a primarily theological problem that can just be resolved through repentance and a mindset shift. It's not a mindset shift for Michael Tate. He's an abuser. The language of sin really just deflects here, and it tries to take away from the severity of abuse, because all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. So who are you to judge Michael Tate for his decades of serious abuse? This spiritualization can be really damaging. It minimizes the real-world impact on the victims and turns their trauma into a byproduct of someone else's spiritual growth or journey or sin. It transforms what could be considered criminal behavior into severe emotional and psychological abuse. It turns the focus onto how can we as the church, the public, the fans, forgive Michael Tate and help him get restored, rather than how can we bring them to justice and help the victims find healing. And this brings us to the final and perhaps most insidious tactic that are used in these types of situations. It's the immediate and fervent push to move on from the controversy, to frame it solely as a moment for grace and restoration, and to rapidly shut down any further discussion or critical questioning by labeling it as gossip. We're already hearing it. The calls are echoing across social media and evangelical circles. I didn't get the idea for this video in Avoid. It's because I've seen it in every comment section on every single piece of media that I've come across regarding Michael Tate. People are saying things like, he's confessed, he's seeking help. That's really admirable. God forbid someone confess their sins. God forbid we ask for forgiveness. We just need to extend grace and pray and forgive him. And if you go onto those comment sections or you join the conversation and God forbid you dare to ask the uncomfortable questions about the victim's experiences and the specific nature of the harm and the extent of the harm and the systemic issues that allow this to continue in this industry, or about the concrete steps they're going to be taking to ensure that they don't continue to abuse people in the future, you're often met with a swift moralistic rebuke. They'll say, don't gossip, that's not loving, we need to focus on forgiveness. The implication is that discussing the truth, especially if it's unflattering or challenging, is gossip. This isn't about the church trying to ensure that we're having healthy and compassionate community dialogue, because if that were the case, we would be centering the victims. It's instead a deeply manipulative tactic that is spiritual coercion. Calling legitimate discussions about serious abuse gossip is a powerful and profoundly damaging way to silence the victim. It'll gaslight concerned individuals, and ultimately, it's just going to protect the institution and the public image, if nothing else. It implies that simply discussing the truth, even when that truth is painful, ugly and is absolutely necessary for healing and preventing future harm is somehow unchristian, unloving, ungodly, or even sinful in and of itself. It weaponizes the biblical concept of gossip, twisting it into a tool to shut down accountability, critical thinking, and empathy for those who have been harmed. It shifts the burden of responsibility from the abuser and the complicit system onto those who dare speak up or question or try to center the victim. The harsh truth is that forgiveness is often demanded of victims long before they've had the space to even process their trauma, let alone heal from it or receive any form of justice. This forgiveness often serves the agenda of the abuser and the institution. I want to make a point here about forgiveness, even from a Christian perspective, because I know from being in the church, my own time growing up Christian and evangelical, that forgiveness is central to the theology. But even when it comes to God offers forgiveness to everyone, and we could argue that we should offer forgiveness to Michael Tate. But for Michael Tate to receive that, he would need to repent. He would need to change his ways permanently. He would need to be apologetic. There are certain things to receive forgiveness from God that we like to say it's a free gift of forgiveness, but that's not really true. To be forgiven by God, you have to repent. You have to change your life. You have to dedicate yourself to a changed way of behavior. And if we require that same type of forgiveness from Michael Tate, then he's not asking for forgiveness. For those of us who have walked away from evangelicalism or are in the process of deconstructing our faith and beliefs, this entire scenario is unfortunately incredibly familiar. We've witnessed this cycle play out countless times. And the initial prolonged concealment, the forced exposure due to external pressure, the quick spiritually framed confession, the immediate demands for forgiveness and moving on, and then the subsequent labeling of any further discussion as gossip or unloving or even bitterness is familiar to us. This pattern is so ingrained that it feels like a default setting within many evangelical power structures. This isn't about genuine spiritual transformation or authentic restoration. It's about maintaining existing power dynamics, protecting brand viability, and swiftly navigating public relations crises. It demonstrates a profound, unsettling disconnect between professed values of love and putting things out into the light and honesty and truth and justice and the actual practices when faced with inconvenient and damaging realities. It exposes a system that prioritizes its own survival and image over the well-being of the individuals that it claims to serve and protect. My deepest sympathies and empathy go out to the victims in this situation. Their experiences and their healing should be the center, and their voices are the ones that deserve to be amplified here, heard, and believed.
Have you heard from them? Are you able to share at all how they're doing right now?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have heard separately from all three of the men in the article that we just released about Tate, and I would actually say they're doing really well. And that's not an overstatement. All three of them have left the Christian music industry. They're doing really well. They're healthy, they're happy, they've got families. That's one of the reasons they chose to speak to me, I think, because they knew that they were settled and they'd done a lot of healing work or processed. And you see that in the article, I think. You sort of see their process of healing. And so they reached out just sort of saying, some of them said thank you, which was sort of, for me, it was like, I did my job well, good.
And for anyone that is still navigating evangelical spaces or those who are grappling with painful legacies of their past, I hope this situation just serves as another stark, if not disheartening reminder that sometimes the grace that's offered too freely in these contexts is not about truly healing the wounded. It's instead about sweeping the ugly truths under the rug just to keep up an illusion of holiness and purity. True healing, genuine accountability, and authentic restoration are messy, uncomfortable, and take an incredibly long time. They do not happen with a carefully worded public statement and an immediate call to move on. They require facing the truth, listening to some of those who were harmed, and fundamentally re-evaluating the systems that allowed such harm to occur in the first place. This situation is a call for all of us to be more discerning, to question narratives that rush to forgiveness without justice, and always to prioritize the voices of the vulnerable. Thank you guys so much for unpacking this with me today. I know it's a heavy one and a rough topic. I would love to hear your thoughts on this. Please comment below and let me know. Even if you don't have anything to say, comment a bird or something. Honestly, it helps. I just really appreciate all the growth over the last few months, and thank you guys so much for sticking with me. I'm going to continue to improve my channel, improve my audio and video quality, so just stick with me as I wait for that equipment to come in the mail. Please like this video, please subscribe or double check to make sure you are subscribed. Hit share and copy link. You don't have to send it anywhere, I promise, but it helps way more than you think that it will. And I will see you guys next week.
So